But I'll tell you what, when I'm done, my biceps are humongous. Humongous. Like that, bang!
My name is Anthony Bevilacqua, and I'm the host of New York Muscle Radio podcast. My arms have been a weak point for years. When I started training, my arms measured 11 inches. Even after many years of hardcore training, nothing would get them to grow. With the help of my co-host, Big E, we set out on a mission to gain 1 solid inch to my arms in 12 weeks.
In the greatest experiment of all.
12 weeks later, this program finally helped me get 18-inch arms. The 12-week arm experiment, the ultimate arm growth program, ebook, the audio book, and the workout video. Pick up your copy now on NewYorkMuscleRadio.com.
New York's very own muscle building coaches, Anthony Bevilacqua and Pete Kacharian, proudly present to you New York Muscle Radio.
What's up, guys? New York Muscle Radio, episode number 121. It's your host, Anthony Bevilacqua, alongside my co-host, Big Pete Kacharian. And welcome to the best muscle building podcast on iTunes. If you're a new listener, well, grab your seats because this is going to be some ride that you're in. Welcome to the New York Muscle Radio podcast. We give out all this great information without all that fluff. Big guy, today's topic, the rapid fat loss episode with Lyle Mcdonald. This is actually kind of a throwback for us. We interviewed Lyle on, I believe it was episode 29 of the podcast, so about 100 episodes ago. So we're actually going to kind of revisit this podcast, and should be an exciting one. I'm excited for it. Lyle was a great guest to have on.
Lyle was a great guest, and this is definitely one of the better podcasts that we've had a guest on because he offers a ton of value as far as fat burning. You know, if you could pick one thing that anybody could ramble on along and just explain it in a way that everybody can understand it, Lyle's definitely the person to do that. Me and you can talk about fat loss in a very simplistic way for people to understand it. If you want to talk how complex fat loss can be, Lyle's the guy to do that. So he's going to school you guys a little bit differently than the way we do it, but he's definitely the man to do that.
Yeah, so I think this was a really good episode, and I'm just super excited for everyone to re-listen to it. But without giving too much away, big guy, what are some things that our listeners should look out for in this podcast? Keep it short, because we want them to keep listening to it.
Yeah, Lyle will really break this down, but the basics of it that you might want to take away are, you know, he explains basically the differences between male and female in terms of where they store body fat, hormonally, where their body fat cells are, and, you know, the differences in long duration diets versus more of a short-term crash diet. I think that's something that you really want to pay attention to. We speak about that a lot, but he kind of breaks down the differences and what happens hormonally when you go on more of a restricted crash diet versus the long duration. Plus, he also mentions that there are some pros to doing it that way. I mean, we're pretty much against that, and I think the takeaway from it is that a longer duration diet is better, but he'll show you kind of the pros and the cons of doing it both ways.
Yeah, we'll let our listeners decide after listening to that. But we'll hear that after the break. So let's get back to reality here a little bit. The Mr. Olympia contest. Phil Heath won again. Oh, joy.
Yeah, I have to tell you, my favorite part of the Mr. Olympia this year was sitting on my couch and eating a massive amount of pizza. That was my favorite. That was the highlight of the Olympia.
Yeah, we made like 2 pizzas each. It was just carb coma city. Just sitting there, just shoveling down pizza and watching the Olympia like 2 grown men do on a Saturday night watching the Olympia. But I think someone who was really like overlooked, I think Rolly Winkler. I think he looked great. He outmassed even Big Ramy in some poses. So Ramy, whatever you want to fucking call the guy. But I don't know, man. I don't understand how they fucking judge these guys. And Phil looked good to win, but I don't know, man. It's a shame. He's breaking like people's records. Like, I think he won 6 Olympias, so he tied someone. I forgot who he tied. Who did he tie?
I believe that was Dorian Yates.
So he tied Dorian Yates. Now compare Dorian Yates to Phil Heath.
Yeah, and like I said, when Dorian Yates did that, his competition was stacked. You know, and I'm not taking. I guess I'm taking it away from Phil Heath, but To be honest, his competition is not really that stiff to be winning 6 in a row. You know, it's not like anybody can any minute come in there and steal it. Especially this year, you pretty much knew it was going to be Phil's show, even if he came in a little bit
Kai
off.
there. Kai's really the only one who could probably hang with Phil, and he just drew the last 2 years now.
Yeah, well, I mean, Rolly Winkler, like you said, he came in, he was pretty impressive. I think in the next couple of years, if he keeps up the rate he's at, he's going to do some damage. But he didn't place anywhere near what I think he would deserve to be. And, you know, every year there's something that's questionable at the Olympia with the placings. I mean, it all comes down at the end of the day to whatever it is, 5 judges just staring down a lineup of competitors and picking 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you know?
I don't know how this shit is judged. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You know, the guys, they all look good. You can't take it away from them either. So it's like, how are you determining that Phil's winning right now, you know?
Well, I mean, by default, he's going to be put in first place, and then somebody has to do well enough
Outdo
where
him. Yeah, that's
they're
true.
going to say, okay, Phil lost this year. You know, that's how it works, especially when someone's been on top that many years.
It's funny
in a
because
row.
he was so off last year, Phil, and they just kind of gave it to him too. So, okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think you're ever going to get an answer as to specifically why he's winning or why nobody else is beating him. But until somebody else comes in and it's blatantly obvious that they're destroying Phil, then we might see him lose. But I think he's still got another few good years in him before that happens.
I used to like Phil when he was coming up. You know, I really was rooting for the guy, but now that he's on top, is just too cocky. Calls himself a dynasty. Like, come on, man. No one's gonna remember you. People still, anyone who picks up a weight knows Arnold Schwarzenegger. They don't know. They're not gonna remember Phil Heath.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't even care about that. It's just the competition now to watch it is just so it's boring because it's like you're watching the same thing every single year, you know?
Whatever. That is what it is. So we got some good news coming up. We're going to have our 2017 sponsored athlete search, our New York Muscle Radio sponsored athlete search. Well, actually, this time we only were selecting 2 people, and we made we changed it around and we selected 3 based on the stories that we heard. But this year we're actually looking for 10 people. We're taking on 10 sponsored athletes. The cool thing about this is we're not asking for only competitors. So we want someone who's willing to make a transformation and be a New York Muscle Radio sponsored athlete. We're going to help you make that transformation, and you're going to be part of the New York Muscle Radio team. So again, we're going to be looking for 10 people this time. So that's a huge difference in numbers. So if you missed out last time, please, please, please apply again. And all that information is going to be up very, very soon. But we just wanted to make that announcement that it's coming because we want to have this good to go by, Christmas time. We want to be out and done with the amount of people that we select. So pretty soon it's going to be on the website.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been a year already. You know, we started this last year right around, I think it was late November. We opened up the entries and then we picked them December, and we actually started early because we had two people that were competing. 2 of our sponsored athletes were competing this year, and we said, you know what, let's get a head start and work with them in the off season. And we had a nice chunk of time to get them in the off season to bring up their calories, get them ready to start their diets, and it was a pretty good season for both of them, might I say.
Yeah, so we're looking for 10 people this time. So again, be on the lookout for that because that's going to be huge. Also, guys, remember, we dropped the Get Jacked in 12 program. It's a free training program at newyorkmuscleradio.com/products. And don't forget to pick up our arm routine as well, the 12-week arm experiment. I was actually going to, I'm so bad at social media, man. I hate it. Like, sometimes it's like, it's almost like a job to create a post. And I'm like, man. But I had 2 ideas for a post, and I didn't do either one of them, which is terrible. I probably should have. But I wanted to do a video on how to properly do a reset during deadlifts because some people were asking, and I was going to put it up. I was going to actually go live in the New York Muscle Radio group, but I tried, and then the angles weren't too good, like of the camera, because, you have to hold the camera in a certain way, especially when you're deadlifting. You have to get the whole body. I was like, and I had no one there with me. I'm like, forget it. And then today I was doing the arm program, and I was curling. I was like, I should put this up. I'm like, next time.
Come on, man. You're leaving our listeners hanging over here.
I know. It's so bad, man. But come on. It's like a job to post on social media sometimes.
Yeah, I like to just go to the gym and I like to work out and leave. I never understand how these people are in the gym and just take 1,000 pictures of videos and then post them up. It just takes forever. I like to get in and out of the gym in as short as possible.
Yeah. I don't know. So very, very bad with that. But yeah. We have to get on with that. I really gotta start. That's my goal. Just should be my New Year's resolution for 2017 to post more.
Start it early, man. Get a head start.
Exactly. So again, if you guys do happen to pick up our free program, which is the Get Jacked in 12, make sure you use the hashtag Get Jacked in 12. Which of course, because I'm so bad at social media, I forgot to been tagging that in my own posts. You would think that the people who created the hashtag should put it in their posts.
You got to step your game up, man.
I'm slacking. I need to take half pictures of my body like my co-host here does on his Instagram.
Half pictures, man. That's all you want to see is the half. I don't know. Maybe some people want to see the other half.
All right, let's move on to the shout-outs portion of today's podcast. So today's shout-outs are going to come directly from our Facebook page, and we're going to shout out to people who have shared our posts. So again, if you guys want to shout out, you can like our Facebook page, facebook.com/New York Muscle Radio. You can like us and follow us on Instagram at AB Fitness and Pizza Jacked Fitness. And or you could share our stuff and you'll get a shout out that way, or leave us a 5-star review. Any way that you get our attention, we're going to give you a shout out. So today's shout outs: David Cocello, Darlene Termere, Kara Heiser Heibel. I don't mean to laugh at your name. Mosin Kadim and Dino Hartwick. So shout out to you guys for sharing our posts, and we really, really appreciate it. Do you have any on your end there, big guy?
Let me see. I'll pull it up really quick. I know I should have did this while you were giving everybody else a shout out, but I actually, you know what? I want to give a shout out to someone who downloaded our Get Jacked in 12 program, and he had a couple questions. He reached out to us, and I think we've given him a shout out before, but you know what? Another one is definitely worth it because he's a loyal listener. Do you remember who I'm talking about?
I think so. Did we answer his question?
No, but
so let's answer it right now.
He actually had a question about the Get Jacked in 12 program. But do you remember do you remember his name? Remember Kiwi?
No.
You remember?
You know how many
Kiwi.
names I butcher on this show?
We still don't know how to pronounce his name. I think he messaged us and said it, but it's
Quinoa?
No, it's Ki Okor Nokwo.
Humu nuku nuku. Well, that's the fish from Hawaii, the native fish.
I know what you're talking about. Wait, say that again.
Humu. Wait, I used to know how to do it because I went to Hawaii. Humu nuku nuku. Some crap like that.
I remember that from Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Yeah. Bitch. That's what he says. Yeah, he says the whole word and he goes, bitch. The big black guy.
What's the state fish of Hawaii?
Huma huma nuka nuka apua ah. Yeah, bitch.
Yeah, that was a great movie, by the way.
Yeah, it really was. So what's his question, man?
All right, so let me pull up his question.
And you didn't even shout him out.
I want to give a shout out to Key. I believe his name is Key, or I believe it's Key. But he said, "Hey guys, huge fan, and I've got a shout out on your program before. I just downloaded the 12-week Jack program. I was wondering where cardio should be inserted, and what kind. Thanks." So with the Get Jacked in 12 training program, it's basically a 5-day split. We didn't put any cardio in there because cardio should be. It's pretty much dependent on what your goals are, who you are, and what you're currently doing. If you're currently doing no cardio, we're not just going to throw in, 2 high-intensity sessions of 15 intervals on top of it. That might be pretty big to start for most people. Maybe your goal isn't even to burn any fat, so you probably don't need it. So with that, I'd like to say start, if you're doing no cardio and you're doing this program, start very slow. We do favor high-intensity cardio over long-duration steady-state cardio in most cases, but we like to keep it minimum to start, and usually a good place to start would be maybe 2 sessions, about 5 intervals each, max. There's definitely a time and place where you could do more or less, but you could always start with that and then build up. And, if you're doing any other cardio, you can put those in there, but if you're not doing any and you want to start with something mild, that's a good place to start.
Well said. I have nothing to add to that.
And if you want to do those on your off days, like I said, it's a 5-day split. If you want to come in the gym on your 2 off days, you'll pretty much be in and out in a few minutes. But you could do this on your off days, or you could do them post-workout. It really just makes a difference where you put them in for the whole week, as opposed to day by day. Don't stress those little details like that.
Actually, the one thing that I will add to that is if you're going to do low-intensity type cardio, make sure you keep track of how many calories you're burning per session and total for the week, because that's going to be the only thing that matters. Some people say, oh, just do a half hour 3 times a week. Well, one person will burn 100 calories and another person will burn 400 calories. Or one time you'll feel like running and you'll burn more, and the next time you'll feel like barely walking and you'll burn less. There's no real measurable tool there. So just keep track. Say, okay, I'm going to burn 1,000 calories a week, and then it's your job to break that up however you see fit. If you want to do 250 one day and 750 the next, that's fine.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's going to come down to what you're doing consistently throughout the week. So you want to try and measure everything to make sure that it's consistent.
All right, so let's move on to the listener question of the day. Again, if you guys have a case study or an issue with your fitness in some sense of the word, go over to NewYorkMuscleRadio.com, click on that listener question tab, and submit your question or case study to us, and we'll help you fix it. So today's question is from Tim Suzukowicki. Close enough. Hey guys, can you recommend an alternative to tilapia? Tilapia is cheap and tastes great, but after reading up on it and the way it's raised, I decided to look elsewhere. Keep up the good work. Well, Tim, we practice flexible dieting. Flexible dieting, and we basically are, follow the whole flexible approach. So if you don't want to eat tilapia, there's no reason you have to eat tilapia.
I got to cut you off for a second. Did he say in the email that he listens to the podcast?
Hey guys, can you tilapia is cheap and tastes good, but after reading up on it, no. He didn't say he listens to the podcast.
I mean, I'm assuming that since he messaged us that he does listen to the podcast. So I would think that he would know the answer to that by now.
Yeah. So if you don't want tilapia, that's fine. Go to another source of food that you do like. But I think maybe what he's asking for is an alternative to tilapia, maybe macronutrient wise, like nutrition wise, like what would be equal to tilapia, because tilapia is a rather high in protein and very, very low in fat. I think it has like 1 or 1.5 grams per piece. So it's very, very low. So I would say an alternative to tilapia. I happen to really like tilapia. It's so quick and easy to make. I would say any other pretty much white fish. Orange roughy is pretty lean, but it's expensive. I would have to say, I guess tuna.
Yeah, that
would be close second to tilapia. But tuna, sometimes it can be gross. Actually, I hate eating it out of the can. I so much more prefer eating it out of those bags. Mm-hmm. Those bags are so good, man. I think it's when the tuna sits in the can, it gets that nasty taste.
Yeah, you'll get
when it sits in the packet, it doesn't
taste.
Yeah, when it's in that packet, it doesn't taste like that at all. Like I never was able to. I remember when I was a kid, when I first started working out, I heard you had to eat tuna, and I tried to eat it out of the can, bro, and I could not.
I used to do that all the time. Yeah.
Oh my god, bro! I don't know how
straight from the can.
That's fucking disgusting. I tried once, and I was like, oh hell no.
Well, if you guys want a little tip on tuna to kind of neutralize that tuna fishy taste too, a lot of times I'll put like a little teaspoon of lemon juice in there. It'll take that taste out of there. Pretty much kills it.
And you eat it right out of the can?
You can, yeah. I mean, if you can make it however you want. I'm saying if you want to take the tuna taste out without putting mayo and stuff like that in there, if you just want to eat it plain, put a little lemon juice on there.
Actually, you know what I used to do? It tastes like paper after you do this, but I actually used to boil it because I hated that taste. You just throw it in the thing, heat it up and boil it, and then strain it. Dude, it doesn't taste like it tastes like paper. It doesn't taste like anything. No tuna taste. So it was so easy. You just throw it in the rice and that was it.
Bottom line, don't do that to your tuna. And, tilapia is not going to offer any advantage over another food, provided at the end of the day your macronutrients are the same. So don't eat nasty tuna if you don't like nasty tuna. Don't eat tilapia if you only like tilapia. Eat whatever you want. Eat the egg whites, eat the chicken, eat the whatever. Hit the protein requirements, fat, and carbs. That's it.
Tis true. All right, man, let's take a short commercial break, and we'll be right back revisiting Lyle Mcdonald's episode. Stay tuned.
What's up, New York Muscle Radio listeners? It's your co-host, Big Pete Kacharian, and I'm glad you're all listening. Put down that tilapia and asparagus. Learn how to get bigger, stronger, and leaner eating what you want. Pick up a copy of Cracking the Flexible Dieting Code exclusively at NewYorkMuscleRadio.com. But for now, let's get to the show.
Hey guys, it's your host, Anthony Bevilacqua, and I just wanted to announce that my brand new personal training facility is now open. I'm currently taking on new clients in the Long Island, New York area. If you're interested in working with the best personal trainer in the business, head on over to abfitnesstrainer.com and sign up for your free consultation. Then you can understand why bodybuilding.com has named me Personal Trainer of the Month. All right, so let's discuss basic fat cell metabolism and generally how we burn body fat. Because this episode's about stubborn body fat.
Yeah.
I'm sure anyone listening to this, I mean, you know, we all have stubborn body fat that doesn't want to go anywhere no matter how much we diet. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of this with you.
So there's a whole bunch of steps that go on between, you know, getting fat out of the fat cell and burning it. But there's only kind of 3 key ones that matter in the big scheme. So the first one is actually mobilizing the fat, right? So fat cells are about 90% stored fat, a little bit of water, a little bit of protein, right? If you go look at a fatty steak, the stuff we've got around our stomach, wherever, same stuff. It's just that's what body fat is. It's where we store fat, it's where we pull it out of. So burning body fat, first you have to get it out of the fat cell. And really that's the most important step, right? If you can't get it out of the fat cell, you can't burn it off unless you do liposuction or something along those lines. So that's step 1 and really is the most important. The second one is transport, right? Fat cells, or when you mobilize a fatty acid out of a fat cell, it goes to the bloodstream. If the blood flow is not good enough, and different areas of the body have different levels of blood flow, that fat can get stored right back in the fat cell. That doesn't do you any good either, right? So you got to mobilize it and then transport it away. Eventually, it will run into something like the heart, liver, skeletal muscle that can burn that fatty acid for fuel. And that's what fat burning really means. The fatty acid goes into a cell, it gets burned in something called the Krebs cycle, which is just biochemical, doesn't matter. Produces energy, oxygen, water, right? So those are really the 3 key steps: mobilization, transport, oxidation. And when those 3 things happen, you lose fat.
Got it. So now what causes stubborn fat, especially in certain areas of your body? So how come these areas don't let those fat cells get released?
There's actually a whole bunch of different reasons. One that's just kind of obscure that we can't really do anything about is different types of fat cells store different types of fatty acids, right? So we've got saturated fats, unsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats. Stubborn fat actually stores more saturated fats. So if you like guys that have a lot of fat around their midsection, women around their hips and thighs, when you touch it, it's really hard to the touch. And that's because it stores that saturated fat. Not a lot you can do about that. That all happened when you were growing up, when that fat came on in the first place. One of the big ones has to do with how different fat cells respond to either fat-storing hormones, the main one here is insulin, or fat-mobilizing hormones. Big 2, adrenaline, noradrenaline. If there's anybody from overseas, epinephrine, norepinephrine, same thing. So insulin basically stimulates the storage of fat and completely inhibits the release of fat. And stubborn fat cells are more sensitive to the effects of insulin. The big players are sensitivity to epinephrine, norepinephrine, those 2, the fight or flight hormones. They bind to specific receptors, right? Now there's 2 key receptors here, what are called alpha receptors and beta receptors. Alpha receptors inhibit fat cell mobilization. Beta receptors stimulate fat cell mobilization, right? So clenbuterol, beta agonist, ephedrine, beta agonist, both mobilize fatty acids. Good stuff. Alpha receptors inhibit fatty acid mobilization. And as it turns out, stubborn fat has more of the alpha receptors, those bad receptors, than the beta receptors, right? So women's hip and thigh fat, they have 9 times as many alpha receptors as they do beta receptors. Very, very, very stubborn, very, very difficult to mobilize for that reason. Men's abdominal, low back and abdominal fat, not quite as bad, but worse. Other areas of body fat, like you know how it is, when you start dieting, what happens? Face starts to lean out, delts get ripped, pecs get ripped, and you still got that fat around your midsection. And that's kind of, and big part of that is just how easily it is to get the fat out of those fat cells. And you've seen women, right? Just ripped upper bodies, full 6-pack. I mean, a 6-pack guys would kill for. Fat hips and thighs. And it's because that hip and thigh fat is so difficult to get rid of. So a big part of it is that the ratios is those different kinds of receptors. There's also, go ahead.
Are those alpha receptors genetic?
There's probably part of it to that, but it's really just gender-based. Like when women's fat cells develop when they hit puberty, that's just how they develop. And there's a good reason for it, right? Women's hip and thigh fat is really there in case they get pregnant. Because one of the really weird things is when women get pregnant, the fat that's normally hardest to mobilize comes off the easiest. And it's because they need to provide fuel for pregnancy, for breastfeeding, for all of that. bunch of years ago, I got into that. I was determined I was going to figure out a way to trick a woman's body into thinking she was pregnant to get rid of that hip and thigh fat, but I couldn't make it work. So I finally just kind of gave up on it. So a lot of it is just kind of, it is genetic, but it's really gender-based, right? And it's got to do with testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. It gets really complicated. So like testosterone tends to increase the number of receptors in one place and decrease, and then it's different in women, and it gets really, really complicated. But generally, there is a genetic component, but it's really a gender thing. And women's hip and, because some men will have lower body fat, right? Some guys carry a lot of fat in their thighs. They have just as much problem getting rid of it. And I don't know if it's because they carry more estrogen or genetics or what it is, but men that have lower body fat have just as much trouble getting rid of it. So there's something else going on.
Yeah, I actually had a question to go along with that. I'm glad you mentioned that too, because it seems like for men, typically it's the lower abdominal fat is where they store it. But then you have some of the men who do have, the hip and thigh fat that seems to be more prominent with the women. And it seems to be that most people relate that to having more estrogen in the body than the average male. Do you think that that's something that's genetic? Or maybe
it is, because usually that starts to happen pretty early in life. Like those fat cells develop when we're really young. Like when girls hit puberty, like that's where fat cells just kind of get stored. And right, because you've seen guys, right? And no matter how fat they get, if they don't have lower body fat, they'll never have lower body fat. Like they just do not store fat cells down there. Like I've been lean and I've been fat, and no matter it. Or in my midsection, my thigh skin fold never goes above 5 millimeters. Doesn't matter how fat I get. Just most men, if you don't have fat cells down there, you're just never going to have them. Some guys, for whatever reason, develop those fat cells. That probably happens when they hit puberty. And once they're there, they're just a bitch to get rid of, whether you're man or woman. So the receptor density is a big part of it. But there's also a blood flow issue. And stubborn fat not only has less blood flow compared to other fat areas. It just has less blood flow, right? So find a woman that's got a lot of hip and thigh fat, and if you touch that fat, it's cold, right? There's just not a lot of blood flow moving through there. Women have actually this double whammy. So after they eat a meal, their bodies increase blood flow to their hip and thigh. Like it deliberately stores fat in their lower body. But during exercise and at all other times, blood flow to the lower body is very low in women. So their bodies are set up to store fat in the lower body and just not to pull it off.
So,
thank you.
So if that's the case with men and the lower body fat, because that seems to be my issue, my legs are always the last thing to come in. It's definitely the hardest place for me to go. So a general question, if I took like a testosterone booster, let's just say, would that help increase the testosterone in my body, which would help mobilize that stubborn fat then?
Probably not. The hormonal effects on receptor density really aren't that enormous. They're just kind of not that short occurring. It might have a little bit of an effect, but really the better ways to do it is there's a supplement I've written about a lot called Yohimbe, right? And they used to use it. It actually is used for erectile dysfunction, increases blood flow, and what it does is it blocks the effect of those alpha receptors, right? So it inhibits the inhibitor, which has the effect of increasing fatty acid mobilization. So that's one of the easy ways to do it. Unfortunately, Yohimbe also causes heart rate to go up, blood pressure to go up. It can cause some really funky side effects in some people, and not everybody tolerates it well. Low-carb diets actually naturally inhibit those alpha receptors. And a lot of people years ago found that when they lowered their carbs, that stubborn fat was a little bit easier to get rid of, and it's because that sort of naturally inhibits those alpha receptors as well. I also, a big part of the stubborn fat solution was coming up with some specific cardio-based protocols to try to kind of overcome that natural difficulty with mobilizing fatty acids. And that was based around those interval protocols. Because if you can jack up adrenaline and noradrenaline high enough, you can sort of overcome that natural inhibition, and then you follow that up with some low-intensity cardio, burn those fatty acids off. So those are kind of the different protocols I put in that book, where you can use that oral Yohimbe, you can do a low-carbohydrate diet, or you can do one of the 2 interval protocols, and you can combine those to get an even better effect. But sort of acutely manipulating testosterone and estrogen doesn't really have as much an effect as we'd probably like.
And what kind of Yohimbe do you recommend? Because there's so many different kinds now. HCl,
Yeah, just straight one thing to never use. Do not use the herbal. There's a Yohimbe bark that's out there. It just causes these nasty side effects. You get these weird sweats along with these weird chills, and it's just nasty. It's kind of like if you guys ever use herbal ephedra versus ephedrine. Now the ephedra is just kind of a nastier effect. Same thing. The herbal Yohimbe just makes people feel terrible. So Yohimbe and hydrochloride. I found the Primaforce brand seems to work really well. Like it actually, I know it's dosed what it says it's supposed to be dosed. It seems like some of the products out there don't have much of an effect. Big problem with Yohimbe is it only comes in, the most they can put in a pill is 2.5 milligrams. That's just the maximum allowed. And the dose you need is 0.2 milligrams per kilogram or, oh God, that's like about 0.1 milligram per pound. So if you weigh 180 pounds, it's about 18 milligrams. So you're looking at about 7 pills. And you take that with caffeine about an hour before morning cardio. A lot of people notice kind of a phantom tingle, like there's kind of this itching sensation in that stubborn fat, which I think is due to blood flow. It will also increase blood flow to your genitals. So if there's hot women doing cardio in the gym, you may tingle somewhere else. So just be forewarned.
All right, well, this brings me down to my next question because you had mentioned it before. What are some unorthodox diet methods that have been used to successfully burn body fat? So I know in one of your books you mentioned protein pairing modified fasting.
Right. That was, okay, so that came out of a book called the Rapid Fat Loss Handbook, right? The idea being that to try to generate the maximum deficit possible while still providing optimal nutrition, right? There's a lot of crash diets out there. Most of them are stupid as hell. There's broth and soup and fruit and all this other stuff. And what do they not provide? Well, number one, they don't provide enough protein. And if there's a single thing you got to do on a diet, it's consume enough protein or you lose muscle, right? That's just non-negotiable. Some of these diets are just so dumb. So the idea of the protein-sparing modified fast was to provide a safer crash diet, right? It's not appropriate for everybody. If you're dieting for a long time, you need to kind of take a slower approach. But some of you just want to get it done. So the idea was just to provide sufficient dietary protein, vegetables for nutrients, essential fatty acids, fish oils, and it's not an easy diet. You end up with this enormous deficit. You're like 50% below maintenance, but it's short. And like a lot of people will use it, guys who are trying to gain muscle mass, starting a little bit too much body fat, they'll just do a quick little 2-week diet and then they can get back to gaining. And that's easier than doing 6 weeks of doing it slowly. For contest prep, for longer diets, I recommend sort of a much more moderate approach, moderate deficit, because you just can't do those kind of large deficits for extended periods. You just crack physically and mentally.
Do you find that when you go on this type of diet, this, like you said, it's basically a more, I guess you could say, a safer version of a crash diet to preserve muscle mass.
Yeah.
Do you find when you do that where you're totally eliminating the carbs and you're basically on just the essential fatty acids and protein that, I know you said about two weeks is the maximum time you're on it. Do you find that has any effect on the metabolism as far as pulling those carbohydrates out of the diet, going really low with the fatty acids, hindering kind of your metabolic rate during that time?
Yeah, you'll see. It's one of those things. It's always a trade-off. You can do, small deficit, take, 10, 20% out. Don't get a big hit on metabolic rate in terms of the decrease, but you're not losing fat very quickly. Or you can take a bigger hit on metabolic rate, lose fat a little bit faster, and get on with your life. So it will tend to have a bigger effect on metabolic rate. But one thing I always have in all of my diets is including, high carbohydrate, high calorie refeeds. That 2-week hard diet should be followed with like a 2-week break at maintenance, which helps to get metabolism back up and running. Where those type of diets really get people into problems, especially if you're lean, is when you're trying to do them for extended periods of time, right? If you're a lean guy trying to do this for 6 weeks at a time, you're going to get in trouble. But for 2 weeks at a time, the effects are not that enormous, and the diet's over, in 10 or 11 days. So it's kind of, there's pros and cons of both. So got to pick your poison.
Got it. That makes sense. So what exactly is the stubborn fat protocol? So someone listening to this right now says, well, let's say it's a male or a female, say I have this stubborn fat now. Based on this, should I take the Yohimbe? Should I do intervals? What is exactly your best protocol that you found have worked the best?
Really, it's not that any of them works the best or the worst. A lot of it was trying to present protocols for different situations, right? Low carb diets will work in and of themselves, but a lot of people feel terrible in low carb diets. A lot of women will get depressed. Hell, a lot of men will get depressed. They don't feel good. Their brains don't work well. They get that, that low carb fog, which you guys might have experienced. So low carb diets, yeah, it's not. I mean, God, I still remember the first ketogenic diet I did, man. I felt like I got hit by a truck for 3 weeks. It was awful. And some people never get past that. Just don't feel good on them. They can't get a pump. They can't train well. So does it work? Sure, but it's not for everybody. So for those folks, Yohimbe might be a better choice because that can be used with a carb-based diet. You just take it in the morning, fasted. Same problem. Yohimbe can cause anxiety in some people. Like they actually use it to trigger anxiety attacks. So for a lot of people, Yohimbe is not a good choice, and that just depends on the person. So that's another option, but not for everybody. The interval protocols work really well, and basically what it is, you do a warm-up, you do like a short 5-10 minute interval session like intervals, talking 5 or 10 repeats, 30 seconds hard, 30 seconds easy. I mean, you all know what high-intensity interval training is. It's been so popular for so many years. Then you wait 4 or 5 minutes. There's kind of a weird thing with blood flow after interval training where the body fat cells kind of hold on to the fatty acids. And then about 5 minutes later, they dump them out. Then you do 20 to 30 minutes low-intensity cardio, burn them off. There was another protocol that even follows that up with a few more intervals. So those are the two high-intensity protocols. Those work really well. But a lot of people, especially if they're dieting hard, can't recover from intervals, right? If you're training legs hard, you're on a diet, you're getting close to the end of your contest, you don't have a whole lot of energy, and the intervals, trying to put that in your program may be too much. So I tried to present different protocols just because I couldn't really predict what situation the person was going to be in. So I tried to give as many different options for many different situations so people had different possibilities that they could use. But one way or another, everyone should be able to work with one of those situations.
Yeah, and I have a question actually about the intervals because I don't know if I know the correct terminology, but I believe that there was studies showing that the interval training compared to low-intensity cardio had actually increased mitochondria in the cell and could actually be used to spot reduce certain areas of body fat.
I doubt it. I haven't seen anything on spot reduction, but it's definitely, there's big interest, right? Because trying to get people to exercise and nobody will do it, right? We all know it. There's some interest in interval training because very short workouts kind of have very similar effects in terms of muscular metabolism and increase in mitochondrial density. If there's anything showing that happens in fat cells, I'd love to see it, but that doesn't ring a bell. All the stuff with spot reduction just doesn't ever seem to have worked out. Like I know people have been trying for years and it'd be great. Even the stubborn fat protocols, it's not like it really pulls fat off the body in a different way that it would. It just makes it easier. You get to that point where the stubborn fat just won't come off and you start losing more muscle or you give up on your diet or whatever. It just makes it easier to keep the fat loss moving. And interval training has certainly been shown to have, a lot of benefits and it's a lot more time efficient, but it is high intensity work. And on a diet, like I said, you can only handle so much.
So I want to back up a little bit because you had mentioned something about stubborn fat being a little more colder and a little less prone to blood flow. So let's say a stubborn area for someone is their stomach, and they use one of those sweat belts to keep that area warm while they work out. Would that help if that's the case?
There's actually a weird possibility that it might. I swear to God, there's a paper I saw. They used to do some really weird stuff back in the 70s. Like, I remember one, no, I kid you not, they did one paper, man, they had to do leg extensions for 2 hours to study. Yeah, exactly. Imagine that. And they did do something with body temperature like that I don't remember the details. Like, there's a pretty slim possibility, but really it has to do with what's going on hormonally within the body. And those same alpha and beta receptors that control fat cell metabolism also control blood flow. So it's kind of the same issue where blood vessels that have a lot of alpha receptors tend to constrict. make it very difficult to get blood in and out of there. So if you can block those alpha receptors with Yohimbe, low carb diet, whatever, not only does it improve or fatty acid release from the fat cell, it increases blood flow through that area. So it's kind of a double benefit.
So you
There's
might
actually-
have a little
oh,
bit of
sorry,
a
go
benefit.
ahead.
So
Yeah.
you might have like a little bit of benefit if you're in a good state of dieting and you're following, like you said, the protocols with the Yohimbe, and it may, that slight 1% maybe.
Sure, but if you're trying to get super, super, super lean, every little bit helps. I mean, when you're trying to get down to single digits or very low single digits, that's a struggle. So every little bit can help with that. Go on.
This actually brings up a question now that has me thinking. As far as certain areas of the body not receiving sufficient blood flow, hindering fat loss, do you find that that's something that would actually prevent muscle gain in that same area? Like, let's say you don't have a sufficient amount of blood flow to burn body fat from that area. Do you also see that hindering muscle gain as well?
No, the blood supplies are really distinct, right? So like here's a fat cell and it's got its own blood supply, and then there's skeletal muscle sitting on top of it, but the blood flow is completely separate. So they're not related. No, I mean there can be issues like they see in like insulin resistance in overweight people that like part of the problem is that blood flow to their muscles is decreased. And I think, some people have those body parts that like just don't get a pump really well, no matter what they do and how they train it. And I think that may be a blood flow issue or an insulin resistance kind of issue, like guys that just don't get good pumps on high carb diets. But the blood flow to the fat cell and the blood flow to skeletal muscle are very distinct and very separated. So those wouldn't be related.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit we spoke about ketogenic diets, but what are your thoughts on pretty much like intermittent fasting, that type of a new diet trend? What do you think about that? Do you think it has a place in stubborn fat, getting rid of stubborn fat?
Yeah, I mean, kind of even the low carb diets, the one that sort of naturally inhibits those alpha receptors. That's probably involved, and as people that have done intermittent fasting seem to find that it has kind of the same effect, right? Low carbohydrate diets effectively mimic fasting. Like way back in the day, they found that complete fasting helped with epilepsy, of all things, but you can't just starve people forever. So they wanted to come up with a diet that would mimic fasting with food, and that was what the ketogenic diet was. So I suspect that those extended fasting periods probably have an effect kind of similar to ketogenic diets, and certainly people are having some really nice results from intermittent fasting, so long as it doesn't make them binge. So yeah, I think there's probably some potential there with those kinds of extended fasts. Like, have y'all ever done it? Have y'all ever done?
I've used it before.
Like like when you take like caffeine later in the fast and it seems to hit you harder, like than normal. There's something going on hormonally. Either the body is more sensitive to the stimulant, or you're getting a bigger hormonal response. Something is going on there, because that's a pretty common occurrence. Like the same amount of caffeine that wouldn't have an effect if you were eating just hits you like a hammer. I mean, in a good way, when you've been fasting for longer periods. So yeah, I think that certainly has the potential to have benefit.
Well, and I think it definitely will have benefit, because I think with that intermittent fasting type of diet, you're able to go a little bit lower calorie than you would a traditional diet, because your meals are bigger. So I think that you're able to drop your calories down a little lower, forcing your body to burn that body fat off, because you're having bigger meals, a little more satiety there and things like that.
Absolutely.
I think
and
in
also
that aspect.
And also by clustering it more around your training, those calories tend to get stored more in the muscle cells, because you're getting that, like, after, Pete, to your question, training increases blood flow to skeletal muscle, increases nutrient uptake into skeletal muscle. So when you're training and putting more of your calories around that workout, you're getting that increased blood flow, you're getting that increased nutrient uptake into muscle. If it's going into muscle, that means it's not going anywhere else in the body, meaning fat, which means your body needs to pull fat for fuel at other times of the day. So yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. The bigger meals are a huge benefit from the standpoint of keeping people full too. People forget that. They're like, the whole 6 meal a day thing. If you're smaller, if you're on low calories, like you're on 1,800 calories, that's a 300 calorie meal. That's no food. Like that doesn't keep anybody full. And smaller women have an even worse problem, right? They may be on these little itty bitty meals. It's like 4 bites of food. When you use intermittent fasting and eat 2 or 3 bigger meals, because you're usually busier in the day anyway, right? When you're at work or whatever, you don't get hungry, you don't have time. When's the hardest time to stick to your diet? At night, when you're home, bored, watching TV, right? That's the diet breaker time. And if you've eaten all your calories by 7 p.m., you're going to be hurting. So if you can move your calories later in the day and train around that, yeah, I think that's a big part of why intermittent fasting works. Absolutely.
So since you're bringing up training, eating around your training, I did a little bit of an experiment myself, but I didn't do it long enough to really see the results. And I think in theory it definitely has some validity, but spacing your meals around your training is much more optimal.
Yes.
If you had separated your training, for example, and do 2 training sessions in a day, now let's say instead of having a pre-workout meal and a post-workout meal, you have 2 pre-workout meals and 2 post-workout meals. Do you find that everything else being equal, just having those 2 windows to space your meals around your workouts, would that help increase fat burning without changing anything like caloric intake or expenditure or anything like that?
I think the possibility is there, because really there's like 3 different issues. And so we've got calories in versus calories out, which that has to be in place. That always counts. You've got specific macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, and fat, and there are differences. But you've also got something called calorie partitioning, which has to do with where the calories either go in the body or are pulled from, right? People that have good calorie partitioning, we hate them, right? When they eat a lot, they get bigger and they don't get fat. And when they diet down, they keep their muscle and they get lean, right? It sucks. Some people have very bad calorie partitioning. When they eat, all they do is get fat, and when they diet, they lose all the muscle. Now, a lot of that is genetic. It has to do with hormones, just skeletal muscle, fiber type, a bunch of different factors. One of the reasons anabolic steroids work so well, huge partitioning effect, right? You'll find guys eating junk food, and if they take enough drugs, they stay lean and get bigger. Short of that, though, the main thing we have control over that can affect where calories go in the body is training and proper weight training. Does it better than anything else. So I think definitely there's something to, if you've got 2 short workouts that are pretty intense with more calories around that, again, if you're putting more calories into skeletal muscle for storage to support recovery, that's got to be less calories to go anywhere else in the body. And I think, conceivably, that might mean calories pulled from elsewhere. It's actually funny, I mentioned Dan Duchesne earlier in the podcast. One of his old articles, he talked about doing exactly that with guys that hit a plateau. He'd have them do 2 short, intense workouts with some calories before and after, a couple of smaller meals in between, and he saw some really nice benefits. So, I think the problem is most people don't have time. Like most people's schedules won't allow it, but certainly a lot of, I wrote about training twice a day on my website. And if you've got time to do it and can schedule it and make both workouts high quality, I think there's definitely something to that.
So it seems that guy that had that, I can't remember his name, the one that you just mentioned. It seemed like he was ahead of his time.
He always was. It's funny. He had a master's in theater. That was his actual degree, and he decided to move to California and chase the dream. And this was in the 80s when things were still kind of, a lot of it was being figured out. Steroids were still legal up until like 84. So, that's kind of when all this was starting. And he was there on the front lines watching bodybuilding contest prep and all the anabolic steroids and all the drugs that were in use. And he kind of became this de facto expert. And he wrote about them very honestly. And even when he was wrong, he was brilliant. Like he had some ideas that were definitely ahead of his time. And that certainly, he was very much a thinker. He looked at research as much as it existed, but, he just had a really creative brain. And so, that 2 a day with nutrients around it, I think definitely, like I said, he was writing about that years ago. But there's not much new in the world. It's just, you guys notice everything kind of comes back in fits and starts. It's just the nature of it. People reinvent the wheel. But like I said, figuring out ways to better partition calories into muscle means less calories to go to fat cells or potentially more calories coming out of fat cells. So that can't ever be a bad thing.
So I think this is perfect because it's going to lead us right into the question that I actually had is what do you recommend for athletes and bodybuilders in the off season to keep themselves as lean as possible while still gaining muscle? Because you don't want to blow up and get fat in the off season because that's not smart.
Yeah, I've always been kind of a traditionalist about this. Like, there's always been sort of three approaches to it. One is just GFH, just get freaking huge. Guys just turn into big fat bastards in the off season. And the problem is it's so hard to diet back down. And you can't force muscle gain. Like, muscle is only going to grow at a certain pace. And if you eat more than that, you're just going to turn to a fat bastard. And eventually it all has to come off. At the other extreme, you've got people that are trying to do, lean bulking, and they're trying to just stay single digits and not gain any body fat. And I think if you look at their rate of gains, it tends to be slower than it could be. So kind of somewhere in I think there's a happy medium where train pretty intensely, you don't want to be putting on a lot of body fat, but even accepting, just a little bit. Once it gets to a certain point, diet back down a little bit. It doesn't even take more than 2 or 3 weeks to take a few pounds of fat, gain back up. I think one thing people have had really good success with getting back to intermittent fasting is, like, let's say you're training 3 days a week, so you eat higher calories on your training days to take advantage of that partitioning effect, and then you can either eat like maintenance or a slight deficit on the in-between days. And I think that's having a lot of benefit for people, so they get the most recovery and growth they can on those training days, but without eating big every single day, which I think is where people start to get into trouble. Also, people just have a tendency to eat too much. They fall into that, I'm bulking, I need a quart of ice cream before bedtime. I'm like, no, you really don't. Once you're past the beginner stage, muscle growth is going to be so slow. You just don't need that many calories above maintenance. It's a few hundred because you're putting on, a pound a month if you're lucky. It's just not going to be. You just don't need to be eating that much food. You just can't force the muscle gain that way.
So you mentioned something that I was doing in a previous off season that really worked well with the lower calorie on your off days. Yeah. How many calories would you recommend someone to drop down? So if they're bulking, let's just say on 3,600 calories a day, what would you recommend for their?
Probably, if the goal is really maximal muscle gain, I wouldn't cut it too hard on the in between days because that is going to cut into your recovery. But if you went 20% above your maintenance. So let's say your maintenance 3,000 calories. So 20% above on your heavy days, so you're going 3,600 calories. You might go 10 or 15% lower on the in between the recovery days. So you're looking at, what is that? It's about 2,650. I wouldn't cut it too hard just because growth is still occurring from that previous day's training, but that little bit of a cut, I think, will prevent you putting on too much fat. Some folks put a little bit of low-intensity cardio on those off days, too. I wouldn't go crazy. Yeah, you don't have to go crazy with it. Even if it's just 30 minutes, really brisk walking or whatever. Just it'll burn off a little bit of the fat just to make sure that you're, that you're not gaining too much fat in excess. It's more fun to eat. Just do the Lee Priest thing and just, put on 100 pounds in the off season.
So do you find that bodybuilders who do have an extended off season, especially when they're really pushing the calories, when they're really trying to bulk up, that when they prolong their off season on high calories, eating especially a lot of very high amount of carbohydrates, that eventually they reach a plateau due to insulin sensitivity, taking in so many carbs over a certain period of time, that affecting their rate of actually putting on weight and then again dieting down?
Yeah, I think it does. I've always kind of used a range of body fat percentages. Like if you're a guy, a lot of it depends on what you're trying to get to. If you're going to try to diet down to contest levels, it's a little bit different situation. Most guys are not trying to get there. Most guys would love to stay 8% year round, and they just don't realize how lean that is. Every guy's like, I want a six-pack. Like, dude, you have no idea just how lean you're going to have to get. But, so I would tell most guys, diet down about 10%, which is lean. Once you get up to about 15% body fat, you're going to start becoming insulin resistant. You're going to be getting less calories into the muscles effectively. You're going to, at that point, possibly even before, I would say diet back down. Like, I don't see any reason for any male to go above 15% unless he's a football player or something and doesn't care being just big and fat. For a bodybuilder, for natural bodybuilder, I think that's a mistake. And I think a lot of where that super fat bulking came out of, like the Lee Priest example, there's that picture of him online. When you've got enough anabolics, you don't have to worry about it. You're going to keep putting on muscle, and when you've got Anabolics, cleanse, thyroid, growth hormone, dieting back down is easy, and you're not going to lose the muscle. When naturals do that, they gain 100 pounds and, well, they gain 50 pounds and half of its muscle. And when they diet back down, it takes them so damn long, they end up losing half the muscle that they gain. It's just, it's an inefficient way to do it. So for most guys, I would say, you know, pick those ranges, get down to 10%, which is lean, gain until you hit maybe 15%, going to start becoming insulin resistant, diet back down a little bit, and do it, you know, keep your proper weight training, keep your protein high, you know, diet down so you don't lose that muscle that you just gained. Gain back up a little bit, lean back out. Something Anthony mentioned that I think a lot of physique competitors forget is you probably can't compete every year. I've got a friend, a guy named Eric Helms, who y'all probably know.
Yes.
Really good guys. He's a good friend. He's a friend of mine. And, you know, we've been talking about it. And for women especially, right, it may take them 6 months to diet to contest shape. Right, they got to go really, really slowly. And men can take a while too. So you diet down, so that's 6 months. It takes you 2 or 3 months to recover. All right, well, that's 9 months or possibly longer. Okay, when are you supposed to gain muscle? Like if you're going to, you know, by the time you're done dieting and getting back to where you need to be, it's almost time to diet again. And what he recommends actually is people taking every other year off of competing for that reason, right? You need that full year to get back to normal, be able to train and make some gains. Otherwise, you know, guys that compete every year, they never seem to make a lot of progress. So I think having an extended off season where you keep the body fat under control, like Pete mentioned, that's the way to do it. So you get that good full year of some good solid growth, make the growth, you can make sure, you know, your body kind of stabilizes to hang on to it, and you can start your contest diet or that really extreme cutting diet early enough that you can do it slowly, take breaks, avoid muscle loss, you know, and come back down, and you'll end up at a much higher place than you started. But it's a slow process, and nobody wants that.
Yeah, everybody wants an easy answer.
Hell yeah.
So if someone came to you and let's say their goal ultimately was they just wanted to put on the most amount of muscle as possible while staying relatively lean, maybe they don't want to compete, or at least not in the near future, and let's say they were average males, about, you know, 180 pounds, but in good shape, stayed around 8 to 10% body fat, and they wanted to put on as much muscle as possible. Let's say their goal was to break at least 200 pounds, maybe even go up to 230 pounds. What would your strategy be?
For that, you know, if they're trying to put on, 50 pounds, that's going to be a couple of years, if not more. Like any faster rate than that, they're just going to end up way fatter than they want to be. You know, for 20 pounds, that's probably a good year process. And like I said, I take a much more traditional approach. You know, either we can do the alternating days, like talked about, or just basically just straight gain for, it might end up being, you know, 2 8-week cycles is 16 weeks. By that point, you should have put on, you know, 10, 12, 14 pounds, some portion of its fat. Do a short little 2, 4, 6-week diet. Stabilize back there. You should keep most of the muscle. That's 24 weeks. Do that again. That's going to be your year. And you should end up, you know, probably a solid, at least 8, you know, somewhere 10, 15 pounds heavier muscle-wise without carrying any more body fat than you started with. I'm listening. Just give me 1 second.
I think that's interesting though, Pete, because, you know, like you hear a lot of people talking about, you know, like John Hansen did like that big bulk when he was younger, and Lyle, we were just talking. We had John Hansen on here a couple days ago, and he mentioned that when he was younger, he did a big bulk. He took like I believe he said a year off, right, Pete? It was a year or something like that.
Yeah, he would take a year off. Yeah,
he took himself from like sub 200 to around 220, 230. And he looked relatively lean while he did it. I mean, granted, you know, he has good genetics and this and that, but, you know, I don't know if age has anything to do with, you know, something like that. Because you hear some people who just kind of go on that approach and just stay the whole year bulking, and they end up with a whole different physique.
Yeah, and that's, you know, we're talking about that calorie partitioning thing, and that's really hormonal. If you've got high natural testosterone levels, low cortisol, good thyroid, you know, good insulin sensitivity, those guys get away with it because their bodies are just storing calories and skeletal muscle so effectively. The problem is that that's clearly not everybody. You know, there's folks out there that just, when they try to do that, they just get fat. And I think that's where you get into, you know, the fact that there's a lot of individual differences. What works for one person frequently doesn't work. You want to gain the best, like we could go back in time, puberty. And if that's the time, like if you were to train right and eat when you got that natural steroid cycle going on, I mean, hell, look at guys that work on farms, right? They train through puberty by baling hay and moving cows. Those guys just get big and strong and stay that way, right? Whatever those gains are damn near permanent. As you get older, it gets harder, but there's definitely that big genetic component. And, you see a lot of guys are like, yep, going to put on 30 pounds in 6 months, and 20 pounds of it is lard. So works for some. I think others, some of these other strategies we've talked about, whether it's cycling your calories day to day. Even one of the old ideas, kind of Fred Hatfield back in the 80s, he had kind of... Yeah, Dr. Squad. He had a reverse cyclical diet, right? The typical cyclical diet is 5 days of low calories and 2 days of high. He flipped that. He was like, well, let's do 5 days of high calories, when you're training intensely, a couple days lower calories to make sure that you're keeping the body fat under control. I think even that's a worthwhile strategy. It's just kind of doing cyclical dieting in reverse. The every other day thing we talked about, similar thing, you end up with 3 high-calorie days and 4 lower-calorie days, 6 of one, half a dozen the other. I think it depends on what, the kind of the person's preference. Some people, I don't know, it's a psychological thing. Some people tend to do this every damn day. It gets difficult, so they just want to eat for 4 or 5 days and then cut calories for 2 or 3 days, or gain for 6 weeks, diet for 2 weeks. It all kinds of ends up being about the same in the big scheme of things, just depending on people's personal preferences. And, some people just don't want to worry about this when they're gaining. They want to eat and train their nuts off, make good gains, get stronger, and then take a couple weeks and diet it back off, get back to gaining. So a lot of it's just the person, kind of like with intermittent fasting, finding that approach that fits them and their life and whatever.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, let's sum up this podcast. So for anyone who's listening to us at this point, let's sum it up. And so in your words, stubborn fat, how do we get rid of it really quick? The gist.
The gist, you basically need you have to find a way to overcome that natural difficulty to mobilization. So low carbohydrates, intervals followed by some low-intensity cardio, if you can tolerate it, oral Yohimbe with caffeine before just low-intensity cardio. Any one of those will work and work effectively.
Does Yohimbe have to be taken on an empty stomach?
It does, actually. It's one of the, for some reason, Yohimbe is completely inactivated by insulin. Like it doesn't work at all. So it does have to be completely fasted. It means just nothing in your coffee. And people are like, what about, can I have a little sugar and have a little cream? Like, you know what? You won't die. You're not going to die if you don't have a little cream in your coffee for an hour. So suck it up. Just have some caffeine, go get your hour cardio done, and then eat afterwards. But yeah, it does need to be completely fasted. If you can't do that, some people have to do cardio in the evening. Try to at least make it 4 hours after a meal so that insulin is down. But yeah, it does need to be under fasted conditions ideally. And I think probably with intermittent fasting, it would probably work even better, just because you've got that extended period that's already going to be mobilizing fat. Throw Yohimbe and caffeine on there, go do your brisk hour of walking, and I think people would notice an even bigger impact from that.
One more quick question, because I actually just thought of it when you said caffeine. A big protocol back in the day when ephedra was around was caffeine, ephedrine, and aspirin. Do you still think that has a place with something like this, or no?
No, the aspirin was only ever seen to have an effect in the really overweight. Didn't have any effect in leaner people, and I was always concerned about, 300 milligrams of aspirin 3 times a day is a good way to burn a hole in your stomach, so the aspirin's really not needed. Ephedrine and caffeine gets it done.
Perfect. All right, Lyle, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really, really appreciate you coming on, and we dropped a lot of knowledge nuggets today for everyone.
Absolutely.
So where can people find out more about you?
Just go to my website, which is bodyrecomposition.com. It's all one word. So BODYRECOMPOSITION. If you just search on Lyle Mcdonald, you'll find me. I'm pretty much all over the place. So, and my books are there. I put up a new article every week. I'm actually working on a new book right now on women and fat loss, which I know why I avoided it for 10 years. Because, man, if you think men have trouble losing fat, women are a nightmare. They're a whole nother species when it comes to this stuff, but we can talk about that at another time. But yeah, my website's the best place to come. Got a Facebook page. I'm there pretty much daily, so people have questions. So either one of those.
So be sure to rate us on iTunes. Hit that review button. Give us a nice review. And do whatever you have to do on iTunes to give us a nice one. And let Lyle know how much we appreciated him coming on. And also check out the show notes on NewYorkMuscleRadio.com. Again, this is episode number 29. And Lyle, thank you again. We really appreciate you coming on, buddy. It was awesome talking to you. And a big fan of your work for many years. So it's nice to have you on here.
Cool. Thank you guys so much.
All right, Pete, do the outro, buddy.
All right, guys, it's Pete and Anthony with Lyle Mcdonald, New York Muscle Radio. We're out.
Enjoyed this episode of New York Muscle Radio? Make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave us a 5-star review, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, New York Muscle Radio.